saving my wife from cheating. On Friday morning, my wife Becky was dressed to perfection. A knee-length red dress with sheer black tights. A pair of high-heeled shoes completed the ensemble. "You look amazing," I said, feigning ignorance. Then I asked, "What are you dressed up like that for?" "Nothing much. Just wanted to dress up." You have to know my wife to realize how strange that statement was. This was a woman who lived for jeans. Monday through Thursday, she had to wear nice clothes to work. But on Friday, her uniform was designer jeans tucked into a pair of black leather boots, paired with a blouse or sweater. In our 5 years of marriage, she never changed once, and she certainly didn't dress this nicely Monday through Thursday. "If you dress this nice, I'll take you to the dance tonight. I'll order dinner for 6 people. "Okay." That was all she said. Okay. Not where. Just okay. I wanted to press on, but I needed to make a business call to the East Coast before leaving for the office. I admit, my thoughts were distracted by how attractive my wife looked, and knowing why it bothered me even more. She gave me a cursory kiss before leaving for work. Becky was one of 12 technical assistants for a large automotive tool supplier. Their job was to be the liaison between the 40-plus sales reps and the warehouse, entering their orders into the system and sending confirmation emails to customers. Becky had been acting a little strange the last few weeks. Nothing major, but rather a lot of little things. One thing that caught my attention was how often she mentioned one of the new sales reps, Vince Davis. She often came home frustrated that some of them didn't understand anything, but she seemed to have some funny anecdote about Vince every day. He couldn't be wrong. This caught my attention, and I decided to do a little investigating. Becky always slept in on Saturdays. I got up at my usual 6 a.m., poured a cup of coffee, and started reading her emails. Most of them were idle chatter of no interest to anyone. Not discouraged, I continued my search, and after checking the trash bin, I discovered I was onto something. My wife had dutifully deleted all of Vince's emails and her replies, but never bothered to empty the trash. I copied everything they'd exchanged onto a flash drive for safekeeping and then started reading them. At first, they were just business messages, but soon, their tone changed to flirting. Then they got very personal. He commented on what she was wearing and speculated about what kind of underwear she had on underneath. Becky reacted like a lovesick 14-year-old girl, teasing him back. I found it very difficult to contain my rage. As the emails got closer to the present, he was turning on more and more charm, and she was devouring it. I almost smashed her laptop when I read how he had moved on to more suggestive comments, trying to talk her into going to work commando. When she said she was only doing it for her husband, he whined like a sick puppy, trying to get her to at least wear panties to work. I smiled when she blew him off, but that didn't stop him. The next night, he tried to get her to send naked selfies, but thankfully, she flatly refused. Still, it was obvious he felt comfortable enough to step up his virtual seduction. I was tempted to confront her as soon as she woke up, but I realized I needed to cool down, or I might kill her. I left a note on the desk, saying I had some errands to run. Thoughtfully, I left my cell phone on the counter. I talked to myself for a long time, trying to decide what to do next. By the time I got back, it was already dark. Becky hugged me and told me she was worried something had happened to me. "I called your mom and your friends, but no one had seen you. Where have you been? Why didn't you call?" I bit my tongue and didn't say what my mind was screaming. Instead, I simply said, "I had a lot to think about." On Sunday, Becky surprised me by waking me up with sex. She was an absolute vixen in bed. Knowing what she was hiding sucked all the romance out of her performance. She noticed my lack of enthusiasm and asked, "Are you feeling okay?" I ignored her question and avoided her for the rest of the day. On Monday morning, I checked her inbox again and found over 24 messages she had exchanged, while she was so concerned about me. There wasn't a single message asking if they had seen her deadbeat husband. For the rest of the week, they averaged a couple of messages a day. The weasel had lodged himself deeply in her mind. And then, to quote Alice in Wonderland, things got curiouser and curiouser. On Friday night, Davis announced that he had saved Becky's job. I read with great curiosity. He claimed that he had discovered an error in the pricing of a nationwide contract. so big that she would have been fired for sure. This seemed like a lie, since Becky was a math genius who balanced our checkbook every month without even using a calculator. Then I read his next message, and I realized he was setting her up. He kept reminding Becky that she owed him a huge debt. As a reward, he wanted to take her out to dinner, somewhere special just for the two of them. He used several double entendres to make it clear exactly what he wanted to eat. Becky seemed oblivious to his words. The last message was dated Wednesday. He reminded her that he had taken a big risk covering for her mistake and would probably lose his job if his boss found out what he had done. Becky wanted him to assure her that it was just two friends going out to lunch together. His response made me boil over. Yes, just two friends, who will become much closer friends. He then gave specific instructions on what she should wear for their private lunch date. When I saw what she was wearing that morning, I knew I had to act quickly to save my marriage. Becky had lunch every day from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. At 11:25, I showed up unannounced to take my wife to lunch. I was looked at strangely by several women I passed, as if they shared a dirty secret. When I showed up at Becky's workplace, she almost screamed, "What are you doing here?" That drew even more attention. Do I need a reason to take my beautiful wife out on a lunch date? Becky's eyes widened. She stammered, "I can't. You forgot we're having dinner tonight. Besides, I'm going out to lunch with Mary Beth and Irene." Both threw her a look that I interpreted as "Don't suck me into your cesspool." Irene spoke first. "Girl, nothing is more important than you going to lunch with your husband." Mary Beth shook her head. "You know I always bring my lunch with me." I grinned my best Cheshire cat grin. Becky fidgeted like a cheater in church when I held out my hand to her. At that moment, a smarmy man in a cheap suit walked in. He was a typical scrappy traveling salesman, always on the case and full of trash. He started to say, "Who's ready to go to?" but didn't finish the sentence. He froze when he saw me holding my wife's hand. I could hear the other technical assistants giggling behind me. I was glad I was wearing my new tailored suit. I looked successful. He looked like a used car salesman. "Alex, this is Vince Davis," Becky said. He held out his hand. I ignored it. "My wife and I will be back in an hour." He just stood there, shuffling from foot to foot, looking stupid, until he finally asked one of the ladies a lame question about an item that wasn't in stock. I worked up the courage to stop by the grocery store, where a very tasty lunch was waiting for me. I spread it out on one of the picnic tables provided by the company. Becky chatted nonstop about work, but for some reason, never once mentioned Davis. Then I said, "If I didn't know better, I'd think that pompous jackass thought he was taking you to lunch." Becky started choking on her roast beef sandwich. I handed her something to drink and asked, "Honey, is there something you want to tell me?" Her silence lasted for over a minute. She wouldn't look me in the eye. When she finally spoke, "I really screwed up on a big order. I priced an item so low I probably would have been fired." Vince noticed the mistake and corrected it. I told him I owed him a big debt of gratitude. It's just an expression people say all the time. Vince said he wanted to go on a lunch date to pay him back for saving my job. So this morning, when you said, "I just felt like dressing up," you weren't being honest with me? Well, he said he wanted me to look nice. You're letting that guy tell you what to wear? He kind of asked me to, yeah, I guess. He told me to wear a red dress. You know all the women you work with think you're having an affair with him? Becky screamed. "Who told you that?" "I saw it on their faces when I walked by." Why? She stammered. "Let me guess. He was hanging around you, bringing you coffee, telling you jokes."
No.
He was just friendly." "Friendly? Did he bring coffee to any of the other 11 women who do the same job for him that you do?" "No, but your coworkers aren't blind. They saw him wooing you, just like they noticed you wearing a dress on Friday." It took a few minutes, but Becky finally admitted that the attention had stroked her ego and she'd fallen for him like a silly schoolgirl. It was exciting, sneaking around, teasing each other, but we were just playing. He knew I'd never do anything to him. "Either you're an idiot, or you think I'm an idiot, Becky." I read the letters. Why do you think he blackmailed you into going on a private lunch date? He was going to have sex with you whether you wanted him to or not. No, he wouldn't. He knows I'm married. I would never cheat on you. Maybe not physically. I touched her forehead with my index finger. But you did it here. And that's as good as it gets. Becky started to cry. I put my arms around her and said, "You betrayed me. You betrayed our wedding vows, and actions have consequences. Give me one good reason why I should stay married to a woman I can't trust." She began sobbing so hard she could barely catch her breath. Finally, she managed to whisper, "I'm sorry." "You're sorry," I shouted. "That's not the reason. That's what a cheating wife says when she gets caught. If I hadn't come when I did, he'd be having sex with you right now." I took my hand off her shoulder and stood up to leave. That brought her back to reality. She screamed, "No!" and lunged forward to grab my leg. "Let go. I'm getting away." She gasped like an asthmatic. "Don't go. I have tons of reasons. You saved me from the biggest mistake of my life." She paused to calm herself. "You're the only man I've ever loved. You're the only man I've ever wanted." A long pause followed as she tried to catch her breath. Tears and snot rolled down her face. "Without you, I don't want to live. Please forgive me. I'm such an idiot. Tell me what I have to do to make things right and I'll do it. Anything. Please don't leave me." She collapsed to her knees and started sobbing. I waited a couple of minutes, then lifted her face in my hands and said, "I love you too much not to forgive you, but we'll talk about this a lot more when we get home." I held out a handkerchief to her. "Now wipe your face. You look awful." Becky jumped up and screamed with joy. "I love you so much." She threw her arms around me and gave me the best kiss ever. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I wrapped my arms around my wife and squeezed her tightly. I checked the time and asked, "Are you ready to meet your coworkers?" "As ready as I am at all," she said. "Then it's nearing the hour to make things right." I cleared my desk, then escorted my wife to her workstation. I looked around for Davis, but he had the good sense to stay out of sight. Two of her coworkers approached and introduced themselves. Becky sat down and hung her head bashfully. I asked them in a loud voice to keep an eye on my wife because I was afraid her red dress would attract human scum. Just because I forgave her didn't mean I would forget her indiscretion. You should have seen the smirks on their faces. Both asked for my business card to keep me in the loop. I wrote my cell phone number on the back. Becky's face was as red as her dress. My last stop was the Human Relations Department, where I introduced myself to Ms. Gladys White, the Director of Human Resources. Ms. White looked like a refugee from a 1950s black and white movie. I even caught a hint of witch's ointment and mothballs in her silver hair. I introduced myself and asked for a few minutes. "What can I do for you, Mr. Niles? I think we can help each other. My wife, Becky. For you, Rebecca, works as a technical assistant." "Ah, the legendary Scarlet Lady. I take it you're here to defend her honor." Ms. White may have been ancient, but she had a keen sense of irony. "You are not the first to seek an audience with me about this situation. Unfortunately, your wife has become quite a topic of conversation." I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out an envelope. This may seem a little unusual, but I would like to file a harassment complaint against one of your sales representatives. Let me guess. Vince Davis." A thin smile cracked across her weathered face. "You're right, Mr. Niles. This is very unusual, but you're piquing my curiosity. Please, continue. My wife is the most dedicated employee you have, but at 5 p.m., she switches over and forgets her work until 8 the next morning. However, for the past few weeks, she can't seem to carry on a conversation at dinner without mentioning Davis. What he did, what he said. This has not escaped my attention, so I began to make a little investigation. I got up half an hour earlier than my wife and used that time to search her computer every morning. It took all my self-control not to scream when I read Davis's emails. The first few were work-related. Then he started flirting with her. He even tried to talk her into going to work without panties. "Oh my God," Ms. White said. "Last week, He sent an email claiming that he had discovered a significant error in a large order she was entering. An error that caused the item to be priced below cost, he said. He corrected the price and re-entered the order, and no one found out a thing. She foolishly said she was deeply indebted to him for saving her job. Davis began pressuring her to go on a private lunch date so she could properly thank him. In addition to emails, he harassed her at work. Becky kept reminding him that she was happily married and hoped she hadn't given him the wrong impression. Eventually, he wore her down and she agreed to have lunch at a restaurant. But that was the end of it. As you can see, his idea of her being deeply indebted to him had nothing to do with buying a hamburger and fries. I held out the printed emails to her. One moment, Mr. Niles. Our sales representatives don't have access to the billing portion of our program. He couldn't have done what he claims. She picked up the phone and dialed a few numbers. Fortunately, we have a keystroke logging program. In a few minutes, we'll know what really happened. William, I need your skills. She explained exactly what Davis was going to do, then looked at the last email. Check Rebecca Niles's computer from last week. You're sure about that? Every single order. I'm sorry I doubted you. Thank you very much, William. Mr. Niles, it appears your wife has been sold the goods. Every order she entered was 100% accurate. No changes from what her supervisor said at her last performance review. I would be very surprised to hear otherwise. Unfortunately, my wife believed him. That's really very unfortunate. There had been no letters for the last 2 mornings. But when I saw the way she was dressed, I realized that he had blackmailed her into going on their lunch date. That raises an interesting question. I can't understand why he would want to force my wife to draw so much attention to herself with that dress. One would think discretion would be paramount. I bet Davis is a misogynist and he was more interested in flaunting his control over her, to make her his trophy, so to speak. It didn't matter if he had sex with her, as long as his buddies thought he did. I think you're right, Mr. Niles. After leaving M. White, I had the distinct impression that Davis was going to have to update his resume. I had a bad feeling that he would be waiting for my wife in the parking lot after work. Fortunately, I had a good friend in the police department who was happy to drive through the parking lot during the layoff. Officer Tellick even found a parking spot where he had a clear shot of Becky's car on his security camera. The hardest part for me was heeding his admonition to stay out of a 5-meter radius. If something happens, don't worry. I won't let anything happen to your wife. Davis waited for Becky, hiding behind the van. When she pressed the remote button to open her door, he pounced on her. He threw her down on the trunk and screamed, "You fool! You're going to pay for what you did." In Davis's defense, there's no way he could have known that the man who pulled him away from my wife was a police officer. Too bad he swung before he looked. His fist hit Officer Selleck's jaw, causing him to stagger but not fall. He retaliated with several blows to Davis's head with his baton until he let go of Becky. By then, blood was pouring from his nose and mouth. He swung blindly and was rewarded with a taser shot to the chest. It jerked his legs up, and he collapsed face down on the pavement, going limp. Selleck knelt down and cuffed him behind his back. By this time, a large crowd had gathered to watch what was happening. A few minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up. He was still twitching as they loaded him into the back seat of the car. Mary Beth and Irene led the crowd in applauding the police officers as they led Davis away. Becky looked shocked. Officer Selleck told her he would take her to the station to file a report. I was on my way to my next client when the phone rang. It was Irene. Thought you might be interested to know. Davis was in the stockroom berating your wife for not going to lunch with him when he was called into HR. I saw him about a half-hour later when he was being escorted out by a security guard. Next thing I knew, he was getting his ass kicked by a cop for bothering your wife. And oh, his face doesn't look too pretty anymore. Irene, I can't thank you enough. Becky is lucky to have a friend. After what happened with Davis, I don't want you to be my enemy. We both laughed. Epilogue. That night, we didn't go out to dinner and dancing. Instead, we ordered pizza and spent the evening sitting in front of the fireplace, drinking wine and talking. Becky was embarrassed by how naive and gullible she was. She called me her hero and said I was like a knight in shining armor, protecting her virtue. Many tears were shed, but now we are closer than ever. Then we went upstairs to have sex in the name of forgiveness. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.